I never thought I'd be hosting a podcast, but we are going strong. Today is a great time for you to get your message out there. And guess what? It's not that hard. Find the right partner. For us at the XM Podcast, that was Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout gets you listed in all the major podcast directories like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. Follow the link in the show notes and let Buzzsprout know the XM Podcast sent you. Get a $20 credit after your second paid invoice. It really helps support our show.
Welcome to the XM Podcast. Here is your host, mental health therapist, Matthew Kanabe.
I am very hard on myself, dealt with severe anxiety.
And it made me feel like a monster. I didn't have the energy to care.
There was just nothing more but to face what I had been running from.
I'm already an anxiety-filled mess.
It's just love. Like, it just goes back to love.
Well, it is hard to believe we've already produced 78 of our podcasts. We're grateful to our listeners for their continued support and for sharing the XM Podcast. Your 5-star reviews mean a lot to us, so thank you. Well, today I had the pleasure of chatting with a dear friend of mine who's visiting the area to escape the scorching Arizona heat. He's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to health and wellness. And he's also the author of a book called Fear No Food, which we will be discussing on today's show. So please join me in welcoming co-founder and CEO of Revitalize, Dan LeMoine.
Thanks. Honored to be here.
Dude, it's sweet to have you here.
Yeah.
And it's great to literally be in person because you live on the other side of the country. So getting to see you is a real special thing.
Yes, it's a treat. This is cool.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about yourself.
So my name's Dan LeMoine. I am a board-certified nutritionist, also co-founder of a company called Revitalize Weight Loss and Wellness. Prior to that, and how I got to know you was I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of traveled my professional career kind of from the for-profit business world to the nonprofit ministry side of things, and then back into the business world with a kind of a renewed vision of how God can use business to redeem culture and, help people flourish.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the Dominican, because that was a really special place.
Yeah. I mean, well, we went on a week-long trip, and then my wife and I ended up staying for 5 years, so pretty special.
That was incredible. That week was amazing, but God did something in your guys' life that was very different than mine. Yeah. I was like, I'm super excited to be here, but I'm super excited also to go home. And you guys were like, no, we're going to move here.
Yeah, it was. So as you know, I mean, we went down to this little town in the Dominican Republic called Jarabacoa, and so we're serving at this school. And at the time, I was working in a private equity firm, and Danae was working for a company or an organization called Teach for America. And we just felt like God was asking us to audible some of the plans that we had. That was about 5 weeks before we got married.
Yeah, that's right.
And or maybe it was a couple months before we got married, but we ended up moving, 5 weeks after we got married. So it was quite a life change getting married and then moving 5 weeks later.
What were you guys doing there?
So Danae was the headmaster of the school, or became the headmaster after our first year. I went down as the expedition coordinator. So all the field work our kids did as part of our learning model was very hands-on, out in the world, in the community. And so I was kind of logistically helping coordinate all that stuff, and then ended up starting a business accelerator there to help serve local entrepreneurs. Did that for about 18 months, and then for a variety of reasons that didn't work out, and left that and came back to the school kind of on the donor engagement advancement side of things. And
you guys were there for 5 years. That's amazing.
Yeah.
How did you know it was time to come back to the States?
That was a tough one, because I think Danae was really finding her groove as a headmaster. I think it takes 2-3 years just to get established or feel like this is my home in a new culture. And so I think she was really feeling like she was hitting her stride. The school was flourishing, and I was feeling like, because of some folks that I had met, I was kind of getting this new redeemed vision of there is a place for business. I left the business world kind of feeling like, does God even have a place for business in the world? Is it just greed and unhealth? When I was working at this firm, it was like a lot of really great guys, but I wouldn't say that they were the picture of physical health or relational health, but
right.
They had very healthy bank accounts.
Yeah, right.
And so I was just kind of like many folks in their kind of mid-20s can have this quarter life crisis, and which kind of brought us down to the DR. And through getting to know the founders of the school that we were working at and some other friends of ours, and other business people, I was just like, wow, there is a way to do business in a way that people can flourish. And I got really excited to be back in the States to kind of live that out. And so it was a wrestling. It's about 2 years. I was kind of ready to go. I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And we just felt like, it wasn't time. So Danae, we stayed down there probably 24 months longer than I would have liked if it were just up to me. But we felt like that was the best way to kind of transition back to the States. Yeah.
And transitioning back to the States, let's talk a little bit about Revitalize and where that started and some of your thoughts and ideas of where that came from.
Yeah. So my father-in-law, Dr. Noel Abood, had a weight loss concept that he was using at his spine clinic here in Cleveland that was going really well. I'll be honest, I was super skeptical when we were still living in the DR and he was kind of sharing what he was doing with me because I've watched my parents yo-yo and struggle with their weight my entire life. Yeah. Which oftentimes shocks folks because I'm a pretty fit guy, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize." I would have never guessed that your parent we just thought it was genetics, and I think that's a big misnomer. Is like, oh, you just genetically you have to inherit these things. But my mom had really good success working with Dr. Abood. The big thing for me was just seeing like her metabolic age come down, and that's one of the special things that I think we really try to track. It isn't just your weight; it's really metabolically and some of these internal numbers. Can we benchmark, measure, and track to make sure you're actually getting healthy so you can keep that weight off and still go and enjoy food? And so as I was getting ready to, a year or two out, thinking about what is life going to look like back in the States, Doc and I started talking about, hey, could we take this concept you have in Cleveland? And I don't want to move back to Cleveland from the Caribbean. So can we take it to another market where there's a little bit more sun? And he, generously was like, yeah, let's use this as a model. And he partnered with us and we started Revitalize in 2017.
That's good. And the reason why we're having this conversation, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but mental health and life health is all encompassing. Like I always talk about your spiritual health, your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, and all of these things are interconnected. And a lot of times when a new client comes in, and I'll do an intake, I will look at what's your sleep like? What are you eating? What's your exercise look like? And they're like, why are you asking me this stuff? Because I came in for depression. Like none of that's related. And it is related. It's very much related. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not eating healthy food, if you're not getting some exercise, if you're not taking care of yourself spiritually, a lot of these things all start to weigh in. You and I went to lunch about a week ago, and we had a great conversation about all this stuff. So talk to me about your thoughts about food, about health, and how this kind of stuff, what you see and how this is all interrelated.
Yeah, and we see a lot of this. We're on the other side of that equation where we're referring out to mental health specialists because it is so connected. Like our relationship with food, our relationship with others is often around food. And so I think we sometimes oversimplify it. We go to the internet and just search, how do I lose weight? And we, adopt some calories in, calories out type formula. And we just think it's super simple. And that always ends up, not always, but most of the time just ends up failing us, right? Because we're not fundamentally shifting how we see our bodies, how we see food. And I think, we see, the sleep's a great example where it's like, all right, I've started putting on weight and so I'm sleeping less, and because I'm sleeping less metabolically, I'm not functioning the way I should and start gaining weight. And it's this like downward spiral, and it's all connected. And I think like you look at the Bible, like you can see that throughout the Bible where God cares about our physical bodies. He cares about the foods we eat. You look at the Old Testament, these food rules and things like that. And I think we're probably prime in kind of our Western culture to have a redeemed view or a redeemed, theology about the body. And I think a lot of times we kind of think, well, this is just the physical that I just got to kind of grit my teeth until I get to heaven and then it'll all be perfect. I think, our bodies are under this curse of sin, just like everything else, and we're called to redeem creation and be part of that redemptive story, and it won't be fully redeemed until Jesus comes again, right? But I think there's a world where we start taking care of your physical body, your mind starts to be renewed, your spirit starts to be renewed, and vice versa too when you're spiritually healthy. So I think it's bi-directional. So talk to me a little bit about metabolic age, and if somebody's listening and they're going, okay, well, I don't even know what that means, or
how do we even start to reverse some of those things as your mom was able to do?
Yeah. So, I mean, think that's a big one, because a lot of programs or approaches will talk about like healing your metabolism or fixing the metabolism, but you're not actually measuring that. And I think that's one of the things that's unique about us. And it's really simple. You can actually find some scales on Amazon that'll show you your metabolic age. And it's an algorithm based on body fat percentage, the amount of fat around your organs, hydration levels, things like that. For us, the ways that we effectuate metabolic age reversal, if you will, is, I mean, hydration's a big piece of that. So making sure you're drinking the right types of water. So it's not just your distilled water. It's got to have the right, electrolytes. So a good electrolyte will help your cells do what they're designed to do, which is metabolize energy. So that's a big one. And then eating, life-giving food that's not processed is another big one.
So I think that's an interesting thing. Let's just talk about food for a little bit. This is a journey I've been on for the last several years. And, you and I talked about growing up in the 80s, like there was this movement that look how convenient all of these dinners out of a box can be. And, it became a way, it became like a habit, a way of eating, And over the last, I don't know, probably 5, 6, 7 years, I've been really looking at going, is this actually food? Like whatever I'm eating right now, is this something God designed that the human body should be digesting as food? I always joke, it's like, what is a Starburst? Like the Starburst is literally like 1 minute in the oven away from being one of my kids' toys. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, I just don't think so many things that we eat. And the problem is like, I like you mentioned, the internet confuses the heck out of people because you got one guy saying you can't eat salad. I mean, I've read that. Like, don't eat salad. Yeah. I've read, you can't eat this type of meat, and it's like whatever, and it's so confusing. So, I think it's easy to say like, the high processed sugars, candies, whatever, but then there's all kinds of other things that are like, I'm realizing like, well, that's actually not good for me at all. What are some of your thoughts around that?
Well, before we even talk about food, I think you bring up a good point, because it can be so confusing, because as the decades go by, there's like, okay, fats are bad. Now fats are good and carbs are bad. And you're like, which way is up? Right. And there's this formula that I heard about change, and that there's, you have resistant things that are resistant, cause it to be hard to change. And that's on one side of the formula. But basically your dissatisfaction times a compelling vision for the future times clarity on your first steps has to be greater than the resistance to changing. So D times V times first steps has to be greater than resistance. Hopefully this isn't too confusing to listen to. But I think a lot of people are dissatisfied when they take the time to say, man, like I'm not able to get up and down off the ground with my kids or grandkids like I'd like, or I've got super low energy in the afternoon. What's going on? But there isn't a compelling vision of like, where do I even like? I don't even know could I even lose 100 pounds?
Right.
Like I don't even know what that looks like. And then the unclarity around the first steps, like what's my next steps, is like you go to the internet or you're just like, I don't even know where to start. And I think those two pieces, the compelling vision and the first steps, is really where a lot of people just never change, because you can be dissatisfied, but if you don't have clarity on what's the next step or what is the right path, change isn't going to happen.
Yeah. And what would be some of your advice for somebody who's looking for the first step? What are some of those things?
There are a lot of different ways on the internet and things like that. I'm kind of like, just try something, because you'll start to figure it out. And I think where a lot of folks, and the research is actually pretty clear on that. Like if you failed in the past at weight loss, if we're talking about weight loss, keep trying. Like eventually you'll arrive at something that works for you and your lifestyle and your likes and your wants. And it'll work eventually. For us, we like to say it should be as customized as possible. Like, we work with the Phoenix Suns and a lot of athletes who have gained weight after they stopped their professional career. And the thing you learn is like, these guys have coaches for everything. They'll have coach helping their peripheral vision. They'll have coaches and trainers for everything. And it's like, these guys are already just talented out the wazoo, yet they still have a team around them helping them customize their training and their nutrition and their this and that, they're that. But as far as food goes, yeah, I mean, I think food is one of those things we have a weird relationship with it. If you're a recovering alcoholic, like you can just not go to bars, and that's immediately going to change your environment, and it's going to be a lot easier to not to not drink by just removing yourself from it. How do you remove yourself from food?
It's super hard. But it's impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah. My heart breaks. I've worked with people who have struggled with, some of the more severe food diagnoses, anorexia and so forth. And it's like you have to move into a new relationship and understanding and connection with food. And that's super hard because, like you said, you can't have somebody not eat. I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed, and I think you and I talked about this before, but my wife and I were just looking at our plates, and the size of our plates were massive. And we'd gotten them, I think we might have gotten them when we got married or whatever. And the problem was I'm accustomed to filling my plate. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we did is we went out and got new plates, and we actually they're called European plates, and they were smaller, but they're actually like normal sized. They're actually normal sized. Yeah. They're not like, super sized plates. But portion control for me, it was so easy to fill that plate up and be like, man, that was really good. I'm going to go fill it up again. And all of a sudden I'm like, if not that, you have to be so aware of calories, but realizing every time you do that, you're doubling what you're eating. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So that was one of the aha moments for me when I was like, I'm not really paying attention to, we're eating healthy food. I'm just eating a lot of it.
I'm the same way. And I noticed that like when I'm in seasons where I'm a little bit more stressed or anxious, or I'm just not as mindful because I'm feeding the baby and she's, I'm super afraid she's going to choke or, whatever. I'm just shoveling food into my face.
Right.
But back to your, about what are we eating? Like, I think there's something beautiful about like whole foods is you can kind of get away with overindulging a little bit on the right stuff and you don't feel super lethargic. You're kind of like, wow, I'm not overly full where I just want to do nothing. It's like, I feel great, 30 minutes later versus I overindulge on, burritos or tacos. And it's just like, well, I'm done for the rest of the day. And so I think, what is in our food? I think that is for some folks who will feel like they're taking the right steps and they're still not seeing the progress they want, starting to flip the box around and look at what's, a Ritz cracker here in America has double the amount of ingredients that a Ritz cracker in the EU or in Europe has.
Yeah.
Why is that? It's the same cracker. Well, it's because they don't let a lot of the stuff that we let into our food system, they don't let that happen over there. And I think there's a case you could make that that's also part of our obesity issues is that there's a bunch of stuff that's in our food that's just not really food.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was watching I think it was a doctor. He was doing a podcast and he was literally going through, I feel bad for McDonald's because McDonald's gets beat up quite a bit, but he was going through McDonald's fries and pulling out all the ingredients just on a fry. And it was insane, how much stuff actually goes into, and all of it's toxic.
Yeah.
Like all of it.
Yeah. Like
everything he was talking about, I was like, well, that'll be the last time I ever eat a McDonald's fry.
Well, it's violence, right? It's like, how is anybody to know, really? Like,
right.
I'm a board certified nutritionist, and there's still things that I'm discovering that I'm like, wait, what are they putting in this that I thought was like, this is at Sprouts or at Whole Foods. Like, I would have thought this was like a healthy thing. And you're like, oh, that's just another fancy word for sugar.
Yeah. That's it.
And I think it goes back to like, what is our relationship with food? I think I have a friend and we were talking about it. She kind of feels like food's amoral. There's no good food. There's no bad food. It's just food. I don't necessarily prescribe to that, but I do think that there is something to lessening our kind of moral indictments that we put on food of like, this is a cheat day. This is my cheat meal. When you do that and you're like, this is a terrible food, then you feel guilty around it. And then you binge more because you're like, this is the last hurrah. I'm going to start tomorrow. And I think, for some folks, they just can't, or it's not reasonable for them to flip over the box and look at every ingredient. Yeah. So how can you be mindful about what you're eating? Are there small shifts to eating more whole foods than, processed foods? I think is a big step, big first step.
I think for us, because my wife and I really kind of removed processed foods, and we're not like trying to be like, I'm not diagnosed to be gluten free, but we've just really reduced that, and it's incredible to me because I don't have that need for food. Like, you know what I mean? It's like when you have foods that are high in sugar, especially, a lot of carbs, it's like all of a sudden I want to eat more.
Totally.
And when you start removing that stuff, I don't feel that kind of desire. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we call it slaying the sugar dragon. So like if you're on one of our kind of more structured weight loss programs, it starts a little bit more structured, then we become increasingly less structured as we reintroduce things. And what most folks find is when we've like, okay, you can reintroduce sugar if you'd like metabolically, you're 20 years younger, you know what tools to kind of recalibrate to. If you do overindulge, you're set, you're empowered. Most folks are like, I don't even want, like, I'm not even craving it. I've slayed that sugar dragon. They're like, yeah, you've slayed the sugar dragon. It's like, I don't even want to awaken it again. But those first couple of days trying to kick refined sugars and stuff like that can be a little bit tough.
Yeah. So there's like this buzzword that I think people talk about all the time. It's gut health. Why is that so important, and why is it everywhere? Everybody's talking about gut health. I think it's super important, but I don't know that it's something that we're all very well educated on. What are your thoughts around that topic?
Yeah, I mean, it is super important. I mean, they're saying like our gut is like actually like our second brain because there's so much connection to the brain. And so I think there's a big piece to, if your gut microbiome, which is often damaged by the foods we eat or medications we've taken, if that's off, it can really throw off a lot of your other, biomarkers and health metrics and how you think and feel and depression and things like that. They're looking at links there with depression, anxiety. I think then marketers then take that and say, great, let's just throw probiotics at this and that'll just solve all your issues. And I think it needs to be a little bit more holistic than that. But I do think it's something that we should be thinking about
I think that's the really important tie to the mental health aspect is I do believe the research is showing us how connected a healthy gut is with a healthy brain, a healthy life, and vice versa. And I know when working with clients and just kind of going through their processes, it's like, I've never heard anybody say, I'm taking care of my sleep, I'm eating well, I'm getting some exercise in, I'm spending some time with the Lord and working on my spiritual life, and that's hurting me. Mm-hmm. Like if no one ever, like if you do those things, it's not going to put you into a bad place. Yeah. And so, I think that's why, and I people say all the time, you are what you eat. And I think that's true. And I think, but I also say you are what you think, but they're actually interconnected. It's
totally.
like if you walk around in your brain saying I'm a piece of crap 1,000 times a day, you're going to believe that, and that's going to become your truth. But also it's like what we're putting in our bodies, it's going to be part of that too.
Yeah. It's like your diet on what media am I consuming? What foods am I consuming? Right. Like that all shapes your inner dialogue. It really does, even if you think it doesn't. Yeah. And, I'm guilty of it too. It's like there are just days where at the end of the day, put the baby to bed, like it's a lot easier to click on Netflix than it is to go and pray with my wife.
Right. That's good. So talk to me about Revitalize, and if somebody's listening and they wanted to connect with you, and what would you do? What does a first visit look like? Do you have to be in the Phoenix area, or are there other ways to connect?
Yeah, thanks. So you don't have to be in Phoenix. We have virtual programs we actually have a lot of folks up here in Cleveland because Dr. Abood's practice was here for so many years. But the first visit is really just a discovery time for us. There's no kind of pushy obligation type vibe. It's really to sit down knee to knee or virtually and discuss what is going on. Is this something that you're ready to make changes on in your nutrition and your health, and is this a good program for you? Kind of outline our different programs. We use some really cool technology that allows us to see what are the optimal foods for an individual. And I think from where to start and how do you start, I think for a lot of our members, they love that because they're like, this is my list. Like I'm a 37-year-old guy. My list is going to look very different. What foods my body metabolizes, what micronutrients it needs are different than the postmenopausal woman. They're different than, the ex-professional athlete. And so we want to customize for each individual. And so for our folks who live outside the Phoenix area, we send that technology to them. We walk them through that. And then it's really a very kind of step-by-step guided approach where you're meeting with a nutritionist or a health coach every week, texting in every day as they, lose weight or start feeling better.
And so the whole thing's not just about losing weight, but it's about a lifestyle change. It's about a different discipline. I think that's important because I think a lot of people just try diets. They just try different things of like, I'm just going to do this fat, or I'm just going to do this or whatever. But the problem is, and I've seen this time and time again, where people will lose that weight and then all of a sudden it's right back.
Yeah.
And this is really for a long-term healthy life.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
That's exactly our philosophy, is like, we want you to keep this weight off for the long haul. And so the way that we effectuate that is, number one, we want to see metabolic improvement so that you can feel free to go to the ball game and have nachos and a beer or something like that. And not fear, oh no, is my weight going to just jump up? That, like, your body's working for you, not against you. The second thing is, do you have the tools? Do you know exactly what are the foods you need to go back to? If after the holidays you are up a few pounds on the scale, you know exactly what foods are best for you and the rhythms that are going to work to get that weight off in the next 3 or 4 days, rather than saying, oh geez, I've blown it, right? And then we wrap around just a lot of support ongoing for our members. So even after you've gone through the more structured first month or so of the program, you're kind of back to regular life, or you're looking to lose more weight, our staff is with you for a full year afterwards, because there's a thing called the weight set point theory. So your hypothalamus in your brain helps regulate your weight. I think we talked about this a little bit. And the longer we can keep you at your given or your goal weight, the more your body and your brain just starts to establish you there, and the harder it becomes for you to kind of you can move off of that. So
for a new client, what's the expectation for time then, that how long they would be in the program?
So typical clients are about 40 days is the most structured part. We then go into about a 3-week window where we're reintroducing foods in an intentional way that you can start to see, wow, these are some of my trigger foods. Like, I thought this yogurt was a healthy food. Well, maybe for you it is. Maybe for somebody else it causes them to gain weight or causes inflammation. So there's a 3-week kind of reintroduction period where we're bringing things back in that we gave up for about 40 days or so. And then we go kind of monthly from there. We say, all right, what are your goals? Do you want to lose more weight? Great. We can go back into more weight loss. If you're wanting to maintain, we kind of walk you through how to do that, but still enjoy your life, which is why we titled the book Fear No Food, because that's one of the things we have to remind our members of, is like, you don't have to be afraid of carbs. And I think there's too many programs out there that are just like,
totally,
oh yeah, I lost all this weight on keto, but then I can't even like look at a donut without gaining 5 pounds.
That's right.
Yeah.
And those are the things that, I'm not knocking any diet. And I know a lot of people have found, and that's the thing, a lot of people have found success in different areas, but, not every avenue is going to work for that person's body. And I love the fact that you're looking at them at an individual and saying, hey, we're going to look at your chemical makeup and figure out what would be best for you.
And there's some art to it too. In that 3-week kind of reintroduction, that's where we're vetting out, like, does your body do better with higher fats and lower carbs? Or are you better with like a higher carb, lower fat? Like for me, I don't do well with like a higher fat diet. So I tend to kind of just use, some olive oil for cooking and in dressing, and that's about it. I'm not eating bacon and stuff like that. Not because I think that that's bad for everybody, but for me, I just know that's harder for me to maintain where I like to sit weight-wise, and I just don't feel as well. Whereas Danae, my wife, she can go higher fat, and she can eat almond butter and all this stuff, and seems to be fine. And so that's really where we're vetting out for the individual.
So cooking at your house gets complicated.
A lot of salads.
That's right. Talk a little bit about the book. You and I've known Noel probably, I was a teenager probably, since I've known that family. You married into a family that I've known since I was a kid, and just love the Aboods. And talk to me about the book and what that's all about.
Yeah, so the book was about an 18-month project that Noel and I worked on to write, and it's really an extension of the work that we're doing in our clinics. We know that some folks they're maybe not ready to just jump right in and schedule a consultation, or they're like more the DIY type folks and want to kind of learn a little bit more about the pillars of our approach, and that's really what the book is designed to be. It's got a lot of third-party testimonials from members of ours. It shows before and afters of internal body compositions, and then it really kind of breaks down, here's what we believe about food and nutrition and why you don't need to fear food. And
that's good.
Yeah.
If people are interested in getting that, where do they find it? fearnofoodbook.com. Okay.
And then that links out to Amazon, or you can buy it directly from us.
Okay. And I'll put that link on our show notes as well. Dan, anything else you feel like would be beneficial for our listeners, or anything you'd like to share?
There's a quote that came to mind like right before we hopped on that, and I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but it's by G.K. Chesterton. And he basically says, like, while I've considered Christianity and like this rule and order that Christianity kind of provides, the sole purpose of that rule and order is to let good things run wild. And I think about somebody who's looking to better themselves, they're doing the work with counseling, they're doing the work to help their physical health. I think that's like a good one for me to, at least for myself, to keep in mind is like, yeah, there's a little bit of discipline you need in your life or you're trying to instill, but like remembering that like the purpose of that discipline to not look at pornography is so that my marriage flourishes. The discipline to not overindulge on cheesecake every night is so that I don't have diabetes and that I can play with my grandkids. That's right. You know, when they're there. And I think that quote, at least for me, is always encouraging to be like, what is the purpose of this rule and order?
Yeah.
It's to let good things run wild. That's
good. Yeah. Every time I read scripture, and I've gone through it many, many times from Genesis through Revelation, you know, I think a lot of people believe it's a book of love, and it is. There's a love story in there that in God's creation. But I also think it's a book about discipline and balance. And no matter what you're doing in your life, if it's not in balance, I think it can become unhealthy. You know, I've worked with people, and I've said this probably before on the podcast too, but I've worked with people who I'll ask them, like, what is your interest? Well, my interest is going to the gym. And I'm like, well, that's a really good thing. And then we dive in a little bit further, and then all of a sudden it's like, but I go to the gym for about 6 to 7 hours a day because I don't want to go home because it's a nightmare at home and I'm avoiding my family. And it's all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we just swung the pendulum in another way. We even take good things and bring them out of balance. And I think food is such a important one, of looking at that and going, what's my relationship with it and how do I keep it in balance? And you know, so many things are centered around having dinner with people, you know, and there's an important aspect of that. But like having that discipline to not eat 11, 12 o'clock at night. And, you know, those aren't the times you're looking for nutrition or being in communion with somebody. Right. Those are times it's like self-indulgent, you know, totally. And that's finding that balance.
Yeah, and it's hard, right? Because it's like we've all been there watching TV at 10, 11
totally.
Like, I feel like I want something. I think, like, you know, I think I'm hungry. It's like I'm not really hungry because if I was, I could go eat another salad or I could eat something healthy, but it's not what I'm grabbing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super good. So I started a new thing on the podcast at the end of the interview. So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Cool.
Anything that you're reading or music that you're listening to that you feel like would be beneficial for people to listen to or read or even watch, like a series, a movie, an artist, a song, a book, anything come to mind? I always like getting hearing from people going, you know, what's getting you right now?
I don't know if it'd be that helpful for the listeners, but I feel like I've been in a couple years of just reading a lot of, like, you know, mental wellness books, business books, like development nonfiction, and I've been really enjoying some biographies and some like science fiction, which I actually surprised myself. And so I used to always be like, what's the point of reading fiction? But I've been into some fiction, but I don't know if that's going to be that helpful.
What's the biography that
I really liked? It's more of a memoir, but Shoe Dog. We talked about that was one of my favorites. Agassi was another one, and I'm not really that into tennis, but it was just a fascinating talk about discipline and taking discipline too far. That was one that was a really inspiring, but also humbling book.
That's good. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. It's been fun, man. You and your wife have been home for, well, I'd say home, but you've been in Ohio for a couple of weeks. So you and I've been able to play some golf and grab some lunch. It's been great hanging, and really appreciate you being on the podcast, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
I would like to express my gratitude to Dan for sharing his valuable insights and spending time with me today. To learn more about Dan's company and their focus on wellness and weight loss, please visit revitalizeweightloss.com. It's important to recognize the interconnection between all aspects of our health. Just as a car requires care for all of its parts to function properly, our bodies also require attention to all its components: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. These are precious gifts from God that we live in, these bodies that we inhabit, and we need to be mindful of how we care for them. Well, until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless.